So there's definitely a switch in that mindset piece of being able to work with those corporate folks, the investors, entrepreneurs, real estate professionals, and then friends, family, and your network around you. So I think the background is great. Again, now that we're live and recording, Ike is the founding partner of Zane Holdings. He's got over 3,000 units. He's an apartment investor, syndicator. He has a corporate background and has been doing real estate full time now for over 5 years. They have over 3,000 units, primarily focused in Texas and in Florida. So without any further ado, Ike, let's get through. The stage is yours. I'm going to pull my video off the screen so that way everyone is focused on you. You've got an hour and 10 minutes. I will jump back on maybe with about 5 minutes to go and we can kind of wrap things up. And I want to make sure we highlight again your contact information for folks to reach out to you. But the stage is set. The floor is yours. Let's go through your 4-point guide to building profitable relationships.
Yeah, and one thing, Danny, before you tune off your video, as I've been trying to prepare for this presentation, one of the things that occurred to me is that relationships are they're not a very metric-driven concept, right? So it's a little bit hard sometimes to convey things purely in slides or purely just by talking about it. If there's an opportunity, I know we've talked about having a Q&A after my presentation, but if there is an opportunity for fielding questions while I'm talking, I'm happy to do that.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to kick this off and I'm going to share my presentation so that we can get going on that.
And I am here if you need any technical support, but go ahead and can you share your screen?
Yes. Let's get this going. Does everybody see my screen?
I see your screen.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, okay. All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you, Danny, for a fantastic introduction and, for your friendship over the years, as well as, for your help. As we've journeyed, we've come from different backgrounds, I know, but we both have a corporate kind of a career behind us. And you're absolutely right that I think making the transition into multifamily, or for that matter, I think any business, right? Relationships really is what I've experienced have been the key to making things work. There are many folks who found success in many different ways. And one obvious way to have success is to have a thought leadership platform, right? So, you guys at Passive Investing have that as part of this multifamily investor nation. There are others we know who have really successful platforms where they're able to share their expertise, bring other experts on board, and that builds up credibility, builds up trust. Excuse me. But for those of the rest of us who really are focused on building things ground up, it's the one key thing for almost all of us has been whether we can build the kind of relationships that are long-term, sustaining, and can become relationships that can actually assist us in our business and our goals going forward. Excuse me, I apologize for this. Got a little bit of a dry spell going on here. Well, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to not have a slide where I'm going to have a lot of bullet points and a lot of different, sort of suggestions and a lot of guru style advice. That's really not my point here, because I think relationships being what they are, as I mentioned, they're not a metric driven kind of a concept. They're very tenuous in nature. There can be a lot of emotions behind it. There can be a lot of intangible factors that come into play in order to make them work. So instead of having a very traditional kind of presentation, what I'm going to really have is a very light presentation that really touches upon the various stories in both in my life, in my experience, but also those of my partners and friends and others who have experienced the power and impact of relationships in putting together their goals, their business, their jobs, their families, their life. And I'm going to try and see if we can correlate those to our particular aspect, which is what are the 4 primary points that allow us to build those kind of relationships that really help us along, right? So as I get going, let me first show you something interesting. If you look at this slide, I would love to know what you're thinking right now. You know, when I looked at this myself, I just found it really cool. I was on the same national level platform, a conference, as President Barack Obama. I mean, look, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, you know, what do you think about the significance of being on the same platform as a previous president of the United States? And let me just share that for me, it was a mind-blowing experience. The significance was huge. And I have to say that maybe I did not necessarily see a direct correlation from being in this conference and my business changing in a dramatic fashion. But I'm sure it has changed over the last few months without me being able to really measure how that has changed. But I think what the key thing is here is that this was a conference with a lot of heavyweights. Apart from President Barack Obama, there was also Secretary of State Colin Powell speaking at this. So there were actually 2 keynote speeches. There were a variety of different highly accomplished individuals from a variety of different backgrounds, industries, accomplishments, as well as coming from different experiences, especially, right? Different ways of looking at the world. So the fact that I shared a speaker spot in the same venue as these accomplished individuals, it sort of elevated my profile within my social circles, my professional circles, and it did grab the attention of a few individuals who would otherwise have not even known that I existed. So that in itself, the opportunity to be able to build those relationships, to be able to get that kind of exposure was very invaluable. And I'm not telling you any of this to boast about it, but I think it's more about thinking of an interesting question behind what I'm showing you here. And that question is, how did I even get to the stage of being invited into this conference and being able to be on stage, not at the same time, but in the same platform as these luminaries? So the answer to that is a critical piece of what we're going to talk about later in the session. So, just stay on board here and we'll talk about how this transpired. And it's one of the connection points in my 4-point guide. So just listen on and we'll get to it. I promise we won't miss why this happened. Now, you've probably heard this phrase, right? And you've probably heard it as, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I just modified it a little bit. I said, it's not just what you know, it's also who you know. It's important not to think that just knowing people and just having those relationships by itself is all you need. You do need to have the knowledge to go behind and back yourself up. So you do need to have the theoretical knowledge as well as some level of practical knowledge, some experience behind you as well. But at the end of the day, who you know becomes a very important piece of being able to achieve success. And this may not be apparent if your career progression has been very linear, it's been along a predictable path. It may not be apparent that this plays an important role. However, the reality is that if you want to be successful in multifamily investing or in practically every other business that I know of, your journey is going to be far tougher if you don't pay attention to relationships. So just laying a little bit of a groundwork on understanding why relationships are so important. And I know we hear a lot about it, so I will be getting into some interesting stories on how these relationships can come together based on the 4 points that I've identified as being key areas to look for. So let's sort of look at an example of the value of relationships in a very simplistic fashion, right? So I'm trying to correlate this directly to our multifamily business. One of the key aspects of being able to take down large deals is to be able to raise money from investors. I know Danny and Dan do a very successful job at that in passiveinvesting.com. We are not at their scale, but I think we've done pretty well ourselves. And I want to draw attention to something interesting here. So I've drawn this very high level simplistic scenario where you've got a person doing 3 deals and bringing on investors. In the first deal, they've got 5 investors in $1 million. And I'm really being honestly very simplistic here. This is not really reflective of how any real investor list would look like. But there's a point I'm trying to make. 5 investors in each of the 3 deals. And in all 3 deals, this person has raised $1 million. The thing that I want to really have you observe very carefully is what kind of a pattern do you see here, right? Look at it very carefully, observe the pattern you see here, then look at the next one I'm about to show you, and then we'll do a little bit of a comparison to understand the impact of relationships as I'm trying to point them out. So let's look at the second scenario, right? The second scenario has, again, an investor, rather an operator bringing on investors into 3 deals. The same thing, $1 million in each deal, 5 investors coming into each deal. And look at the difference here in the composition of those investors versus the previous one. So I'll go back to the previous one and quickly point out a few things. The first thing you see here is that in this case, this particular operator has managed to only bring in 1 investor into deals subsequent to the first one. So just 20% of his investors are coming back. While in this case, you see almost 60% of investors are coming back, right? B, D, and E from deal 1 are going into deal 2. B, D, and G from deal 2 are going into deal 3. There's also an additional component here that was missing in the first one, which is in D, we have, in deal number 2, we have G coming in, who is actually a referral of investor D. And in deal number 3, we have L coming in as a referral of investor B. So you see 2 things happening here. You see a high repeat ratio of investors participating in these 3 deals. And then you also see a referral component coming in here. In this case, it's 1 referral in each one, but that's about 20% of the deal itself. While we go back to the first scenario, there's no referrals coming in. This person is getting, outside of that 1 investor who's getting repeated, there's completely new investors coming in each time with, browned up, right? So what's the implication of this? Again, I'm not getting into specifics here because the amount of dollars brought in by the investors also plays a role in this analysis, but I really don't want to get caught up in the weeds here. The very high level point that I'm trying to make here is that for the operator who is in scenario number 2, what do you think about the amount of work this person had to do to raise, his $1 million in each of the deals versus the person who was in scenario 1, who had to bring in all of these investors almost from scratch in each one? I can tell you from personal experience that this scenario number 2, is a much, much better place to be, right? You're not out there. I know there's a tendency to think in terms of spending countless of hours marketing your deals, building a large database of investors. But the reality is you can get very good results, very similar results to doing that if you focus on the relationships with the existing investors you have or the investors you're able to get in, and build your investors from those relationships versus trying to go out there and constantly get new people, right? The amount of time it takes, and I'll tell you just from personal experience at Zane Holdings in our business, we have more than a 70% repeat ratio in each fund that we put together for each deal. And that basically means that I'm not really spending as much time on convincing investors to invest. I'm not spending as much time in educating them. I'm not spending as much time in trying to dial for dollars and bring them in. To be honest, the biggest amount of time that we spend in every deal is actually in getting the investors to fund their investment, to get the money into the bank account, because invariably there's a lot of complication for some reason or the other where either the wire transfer, they're not comfortable with it, or they want to send a check, or they want to do an ACH deposit. And each investor has their own little quirkiness on how they want to give you the money. But that is really where we end up spending more of our time, not as much on actually convincing investors on the value of the deal and getting them in. And that's a good place for you to be, because if you were doing what this operator in scenario one is doing, where you're really building up from scratch every time or almost from scratch, this is going to be a very big hurdle. As your deal sizes grow and you go bigger and bigger, it's going to become harder and harder to get to a point where you can conceivably, have any sense of comfort about, how much you can comfortably raise for any new deal. So this is where you want to be. And again, relationships play a crucial element in being able to achieve this. So I think just getting back to all of this, relationships, right? That's what we've been talking about. That's what this presentation's about. It's the key to almost everything you can do to build up your business. And I'm going to give you a lot of examples of how relationships have been transformative in our business, in our lives, and those of people we know. So I'm not going to belabor the point. You get it. You need to have them in every aspect of your business. Now, this is easier said than done, right? The question is, how do you find and build the right relationships? And even more importantly, how do you establish value within these relationships? So we're going to get to that. Again, this is going to be a really good 4-point guide that's going to help you really think about how to approach this. Before we get into the specifics, here's something that's close to my heart. I really want to be able to emphasize this before we get into the actual details of the 4-point guide, which is it's very important that you're genuine, right? People figure out very quickly when you're not genuine. And when you're not genuine, that can create a very superficial relationship that will not go very far. Part of being genuine and part of forming that relationship, especially if it's a new relationship, is being willing to help them, guide them, connect with them. And the third part of that is not to expect anything in return. So by that, I don't necessarily mean that, you do things endlessly without having any goal in mind. But what I mean is that each interaction, each relationship you build cannot be based on, I'm going to do this for you because I expect, I do X because I expect Y. That is a very transactional kind of interaction, and it only goes so far. And there are some relationships, unfortunately, which are just going to be that way, just because of the nature of them. But to a large extent, to grow your business, it's got to be something that goes a little bit deeper and allows people to really connect beyond that specific transaction that they're working on. So in order to illustrate that, I think I want to, and I think especially the first one, right, the be genuine part, I want to just quickly narrate a really interesting story. About 2 decades ago, I was on my way to graduate school in the University of Cincinnati. And a good friend from college days introduced me to his brother, who was also on his way to pursue the same specialization that I was going to do. So we met for about an hour at a coffee shop. So this friend's brother and me. And then we stayed in touch on a sporadic basis. We, emailed each other once in a while. And, we didn't really keep in touch. Now, about 7 years after that first meeting, my wife and I, we lived in Boston in those days, as I mentioned earlier. And we happened to drive from Boston to Atlanta. So while we were doing that, we discovered that this, the brother of this friend, who I should now call associate or acquaintance, he lived in North Carolina midway on our way to Atlanta. So we decided that we were going to take a break, called him, and he invited us to stay over at his place. And we got to know him much better. We stayed for a night. We got to know him, his wife, and it was amazing. They had this really artistic bent to them. They had this beautiful house, lots of art pieces that they themselves had painted, as well as other things that they had collected over the years. And it was just a very enriching experience. We got to know each other at a very deep level. And once we got up the next morning, we left on our way to Atlanta. Since that day, by the way, since that evening that we spent at their house, we haven't met each other again. It's been about a decade and a half since then. We've stayed in touch through Facebook. We've gotten to know them even better. We've referred people to them. They've referred people to us. And in the meantime, he and his wife have actually gone on to start a very successful business. They've started a bakery business, a Montessori education business. His wife started a photography business. They've done extremely well in their business careers. So when I launched my multifamily business, and I started talking to my friends about it, this individual was one of the first people who invested in my first deal. And not only that, he quickly introduced me to his close friend circle in North Carolina where he lived, and the circles of people that he had built close relationships with himself. And over the next several years, in all of the deals we've been doing, he and his friends have collectively invested more than $500,000. So the reason I bring this up is that this is an interesting, lasting connection where we didn't really have that much of give and take. It was a relationship that really completely came about by accident to some extent. But the fact that we were genuine with each other, we took interest in each other's lives, it built up that comfort and that trust that allowed us to get to a point where this individual and his friends are some of my biggest supporters in the multifamily work I do. So just wanted to point that out, that relationships don't necessarily have to be about giving always having to do something for somebody. It can be really also about just connecting at a very deep level. So, I think one of the things that I think is important to talk about is how do you find the opportunities to build these relationships? And that really depends on who you're seeking out, right? So if you're looking to build relationships with brokers, then you need to really convince them that you are an experienced and serious operator who's not going to waste their time. One of the best ways to build confidence is through a referral from someone who they know and can vouch for you. And even then, you really typically have to carry through and prove to them that you're serious about putting offers on properties, that you're actually going to close them. At some level, as I mentioned earlier, some relationships are transactional. These relations with brokers do tend to be occasionally transactional. And primarily, there's a simple reason for that, right? Because they are driven by performance in being able to push deals through as much as possible. So while there are opportunities to build deeper connections with brokers, to a large extent, you will find that you're going to be using your performance and your background and experience as a way to break through and build those relations with brokers that will get you the kind of deals that are really valuable. Now, on the other hand, investors are I would say the real opposite of brokers, right? Investors are not there to try and push deals to you and get their commissions, but instead they're actually placing their hard-earned money with you. So they are looking to really get comfortable with you. And they want to know that, this money is going to be in your deal for, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and it's going to be safe. You're going to be a good steward of that money. You're going to take care of it. So with this group, all of the 4 points, techniques that we're going to talk about are going to be directly relevant. And I illustrated that in the beginning as well, right? With those 2 scenarios of how we raise money. Internalizing these concepts in your approach to investors, especially for raising money, is going to be very valuable. So let's sort of move on a little bit. I think an important thing to understand about relationships is what really forms a relationship. What forms a relationship is some kind of connection or connections that you establish with people. And those connections can be of a variety of types. If you know them personally, that's because you're part of their family, or it's a very close friend circle. You grew up with them. You got to know them extremely well in your corporate job, the ex-colleagues of yours, or you've done business together and helped each other out. There's so many different ways in which these connections get formed. In today's world with technology, connections get formed over Facebook. I mean, I know of people who I've never met in person, but with whom just connecting over Facebook, helping each other out, sharing information has led to some really interesting possibilities. So in order for a relationship to be really, truly sustainable, that deeper, sustainable connection is really important. And if that doesn't happen, then eventually what's going to happen is your emails will stop being read. Your calls will start going unanswered. And that happens to all of us, regardless of what we do. At some point, I'm sure all of us have experienced calls that have been ignored and emails that are not getting answered. That's just what happens. But I think being proactive about finding these deeper connections is really what's going to ensure that that doesn't happen to you all the time, right? So that's really where now we move on to the 4-point guide. And I'm going to lay it out at once right away, right? The 4 points of connection is what I call them. So the first one is the personal connection, forming a connection at a personal level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The second is the money connection. And there are various aspects to it. This is the most common form of connection that people make. Unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck just in that aspect and don't move beyond it. And that's when your relationships can get tenuous over time. So you want to have the money connection for sure, but you want to have one of the other connections at the very least that binds you with that person. The third one is the passion connection. This is a really interesting one that not too many people employ or take advantage of, especially because all of us in our lives do have something we're passionate about, but we don't necessarily take the time to establish what others are passionate about. And the fourth one is the aspiration connection, right? Everyone has aspirations, dreams, things they want to achieve. And we're talking about really high, solid aspirations here, not immediate short-term goals. So we're going to dive into each one of these and really, get a good flavor of what can help you build those connections that will lead to those profitable relationships. So remember, as I go through these, the very first thing I said in the beginning, right? Be genuine. I think that is super important. Don't lose sight of that. So the point number one, the personal connection. This doesn't necessarily relate to just being related to that person, right? If you're related to that person, that's an immediate personal connection. But even there, I think it's important that there is something a little bit deeper than just that immediate knowledge of each other. And what we really need here is to be able to learn about that person, learn about them, learn about their family, learn about things that are important to them in their personal lives. And be careful here, obviously, because this is not about being nosy and prying into their lives. That's not what we're talking about. But in a matter of conversation, if you can learn, who they care about in their lives and what they care about, and is there an opportunity for you to introduce someone or something that can be of help to them, that can provide that additional value into their lives, then that's an opportunity that you really shouldn't be missing. So let me give an interesting example here. So my partner in Zane Holdings, Dustin Howard, right? He and his wife, Penny Howard, good friends of my family's. And they own a couple of condos that they rent out. And since our focus is on multifamily, they really don't have the time to manage those condos. So what they've done is they've hired a property manager to take care of it. Now, this property manager has a grandchild who has a special medical condition. Now, over the period of time that they've known each other, Dustin and Penny have given referrals to medical professionals and treatment options that this property manager or many others that they know would not have known otherwise. I mean, I have consulted with them many times. So Dustin and Penny are not health professionals, by the way. Dustin is in a finance job. Penny has an operations background. But they have gone through their own personally difficult experience in life. And they've done a ton of research and built a huge solid list of medical contacts. And what they do now is they freely offer their network of contacts to anyone who has children or has any situations where there are difficult medical conditions. So that's really it's one of the areas in which they have really built value, provided value into people's personal lives. And the question is, how do they even learn about the fact that this property manager's grandchild has a medical condition? It's really as simple as over a cup of coffee, right? Or joining somebody for lunch. But being genuine, transparent in your conversation, being open to listening, focusing more on learning about that person versus trying to push your own agenda or talking about yourself. all of these are different ways in which you can get to learn about that person. I think too often what happens is we meet someone new, and I think the tendency is we get together and we quickly start trying to get to the point and talking about what's important to us and trying to see if the other person can help us out, or trying to gauge the other person as being a valuable contact or not. Oftentimes you lose that ability to then go a little bit deeper and find out, who are the people in their lives, what do they care about. And it doesn't have to happen in a prying manner, as I said, right? It could be where you share your own experience. In this case, Dustin and Penny are not shy about sharing their experience in their own life. As I said, they went through a real difficult situation with their own child, and they're not shy about sharing it. They openly, genuinely share to anyone who wants to learn about it. In the process, that allows people to open up to them. And when they open up to them, you get to learn bits and pieces of somebody's life where you can then figure out, here's an area where I think I can add value to your life, right? And you obviously you'll ask permission. Look, can I suggest X, or can I suggest this? And if that person's open to it, which, if that relationship or if that connection's been established, they're going to be open to it. Trust me. So in this case, this property manager has now become a loyal friend and advocate for Dustin and Penny. And in fact, every time we go to multifamily properties, even though she doesn't have the experience, several times she'll come over with us, and she'll give her own opinion. She'll provide us the review and the feedback on her own time with nothing in return, because we're not going to hire her for the large deals that we're doing. She doesn't have the experience for it, but the experience she brings from her perspective does lend a lot of value to us. And that's a resource who's willing to go above and beyond, which is something you can't buy with money. It's something that you simply cannot establish simply with a property manager who's going to come on board, get a 3% or 5% commission or a fee to work with you on your deal. So here's another interesting story, right? I met one of my investors on an online forum a few years back. And we spoke and got to know each other for a while before she felt comfortable about investing in one of my deals. In fact, this investor, she committed and backed out of several deals before she finally felt that she really had the comfort and understanding of how this deal structure for multifamily deals worked. And it was almost a year before she decided to do that. So in the meantime, through all the conversations that we'd been having, there's one thing I started realizing about her, that she had a fear of technology. And that fear was in all kinds of things, right? I mean, she is of a generation where the comfort level with technology is not as strong. But when she finally decided to invest in a deal with me, which was late last year, I think I realized very quickly that having her go through our normal process of signing documents via DocuSign and wiring the money, it was going to be a bit of a challenge. She had not done any of those things. So what I did was I put aside time when I put the deal together and I sent out the DocuSign documents for her to execute. I put aside time to get on the phone with her. I helped her navigate through a screen share and read each section of the investment documents and then tell her exactly how to fill each section. I mean, simple things like, how do the units that you're subscribing to, how do they correlate to the capital contribution amount? So I spent almost 2 hours on the phone and on screen share helping her complete the documentation. And after that, she decided she didn't want to do a wire transfer, wasn't comfortable with that. She wanted to instead use an electronic check facility in her online bank account, right? The bill pay thing that many banks have. Now, she'd not used it before, and she was really struggling setting it up. So it so happened I had an account at the same bank as she did. So I logged into my account and simulated as though I was putting in that money, went through the transaction until the point of submitting it, and took screenshots of each of those screens, and then sent that to her and said, here, just copy the exact steps I did so that you can follow them and then make that happen. So she did exactly that, got the money over, and we've established a great relationship since then because of the extent to which I went to help her. And you're thinking that this is probably an investor who put in a lot of money in, and that wasn't the case. She actually put in just about $100,000. It is a nice sized amount, but the question is, was it really worth the 3 to 4 hours of my time in hand holding her through the process? And really, I don't know too many operators and syndicators out there who do this. For me, the response will be absolutely. Because I did not expect, I had no idea what would come out of it. I mean, I knew I was getting that particular investment in. But the personal connection of trust that was established by helping her walk through each of these steps in order to be able to go through the process and get the commitment and the subscription in and the funds into the place, that small sacrifice of time, it's been handsomely rewarded. She has been so grateful, and she's been, I think the testimonials she's giving me just by talking to her friend circle, those testimonials and the introductions she's making alone have collectively helped me raise almost $1 million in my deals since then. So I think it's sometimes very hard to, there's a tendency to underestimate the impact of helping someone at a very granular level. There's a tendency to say, look, this is not a good use of my time. I'm going to go instead take maybe a virtual assistant and hand them over and let them handle it. Sure, but if that virtual assistant is not taking the time or trouble and you haven't trained them to do that and you're not really working with that person, that relationship is not getting built. So I think that relationship that gets built through a personal connection is a very powerful one. It directly impacts one's lives, the lives of those who are beloved to us. And the impact can be a small or a big one. It's not forgotten easily. That's the key thing. Connections built on a personal level are not forgotten easily. And the effects of them, as I say, profitable relationships, that effect can unravel for a very long time to come. In my case, in this particular situation, I saw the benefits very quickly, but I didn't know this was going to happen, right? This is fortuitous, and I'm grateful for it, but this is not why I did it. So the relationships, as I said, are not metric driven. You cannot invest time and effort into a relationship and expect a certain equation to say that if I put in X hours and X amount of time and do this, I'm going to get Y out of it. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the second point of connection, as I talked about, is the money connection. I know we're, I think, running behind on time a little bit, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we cover it and give enough time for you to ask questions and make it a little bit more interactive. But this is clearly where the largest number of connections will fall, this category, right? Nothing wrong about it. It's a powerful driver for a lot of us. And there are 3 major things to think about here. One is, excuse me, when you're making a connection on a money aspect with someone, the question they're asking themselves is, are you here to help me make money? Are you here to help me save money? And those 2 things can usually be achieved. And the second one, by the way, helping someone to save money, is a really interesting thing I'm going to touch upon very quickly. But the things that really impact this money equation is jobs. Can you help someone find a job, change jobs, get a better job, make referrals for that? Can you help someone start a business, grow their business? Can you help them recommend vendors to them who can help them with their business or to help them get a better deal or a better rate for their service that they need in their business? Can you help refer customers to them? I'll tell you, there's a broker, friend of mine. She's not a commercial broker. She's a residential single family broker. But I have been referring so many customers to her that she has made it her mission now to make as many connections in the commercial world as possible so that she can bring all those to me. And it's just, she's a friend. I'm not really helping her because, she's a residential broker that I have a relationship with in terms of a personal relationship, but she's a friend. She's really good at what she does. And what she does is helping my investors when they become her customers. So it does become a nice circular relationship where, the money makes a difference. But moving on, let me sort of illustrate a little bit on two really interesting examples here on the make money, especially from a jobs perspective, and save money from a business perspective. So about a year and a half ago, I think maybe 2 years ago, I was at a conference called the Women in Leadership Conference. And don't ask me, it's a long story about how I ended up in a Women in Leadership Conference. But I was at this conference and I was one of only 4 men in an audience of like 200 women, all high-powered female executives. And this illustration that I've put here is really just a correlation kind of illustration. I found this extraordinary women conference happening last year where they had all of these pictures of women who are really highly accomplished and Michael O'Brien in that list. So I don't put myself on that level, but I will say that that's how I felt, right? Being one of really only 4 men there in a 200 women conference. And I was a curiosity, I was an anomaly. So that actually made it interesting because I got to know a few people there very well because of that. And one of the women that I got to know really well was a former senior vice president at a major software company. So as you know, I have a technology background as well. Now, she had been laid off as part of a management restructure. So, and ironically, her forte was in organizational change management. So once I understood her background and her talents in that conversation at the conference, I was able to pull out my list of executive contacts on LinkedIn. I mean, I myself used to be the chief technology officer of a few companies in Boston before I got into multifamily. So I was able to do that and very quickly start sending her referrals. She found a job soon enough. And I have to, needless to say, this is an investor who has become very good friends with me as an outcome of that. And in fact, has become a repeat investor now. So, a quick illustration of how, the money connection works. You help someone, as I said, find a job, change jobs, anything that helps them, really financially, it comes back. The other interesting story I wanted to point out was when I talked about saving money, right? And this happened to me in relationship to my CPA. So I was working with my CPA on my tax returns, and it so happened that among the clients, this was a new CPA that I was working with, and among the clients that he had, I was the first one he had encountered who had actually was using extensively cost segregation studies in order to benefit from accelerated depreciation in our deals. So if you're not familiar with cost segregation, by the way, I highly recommend you look it up. It's not the scope of our session, but it provides a lot of tax benefits in your multifamily business. And getting back to the CPA, he was struck at the tax savings that I was accumulating. So he decided to call a few of his clients who had businesses generating significant amounts of passive income. And in fact, one of his clients had a business that was providing $1 million in passive income every year. I mean, I know I want to be in that business as well, but that's a really niche business that most of us have no chance of getting into. Now, this client was paying almost $300,000 in taxes each year. I mean, they had all kinds of tax strategies they were trying out. But his CPA asked him to talk to me. We worked through some calculations and figured out that if he invested a few $100,000 in some of my deals, he could reduce his tax burden by more than half. And the fact that our investment in our deals also helped him get an 8% cash returns and a potential 2x multiple of equity in 5 years, that obviously didn't hurt, right? So a core connection was formed based on his desire to reduce his tax burden. And well, sorry, I already went past this slide. So cost segregation was the key here. But, after a few months of getting to know him and really, understanding how these deal structures worked, he invested in a deal with me. And then he watched for the K-1 statement the next year. And once he saw the huge tax benefits that, he came out of this investment, he was just sold. He's now among one of my top 5 investors in almost all of my deals. And not just that, he's also brought in a group of friends who are, somewhat like him. And he's told them about his tax savings. And it's had a spiral effect in my investor referrals. So I've talked about referrals. This is one of those examples where the referrals have just flowed in. And it's interesting because in multifamily, we find that a lot of operators, myself included, we tend to talk a lot about the returns you can get, but we don't necessarily talk as much about the tax savings. And sometimes those tax savings don't resonate with investors because maybe they don't have the amount of passive income that can actually get offset. But I think it's important to find out. It's important to talk to the people you're talking to and see if tax savings are of value to them or not. And if they are, then this is actually a very important thing that you can talk about and provide that value to those investors. So, this is an interesting connection. I've talked about business as being another interesting connection from a money perspective in helping people grow their business. One of my investors runs an insurance brokerage where he provides home and auto insurance to a blue collar clientele. And what I've been able to do is I have several operators I know in the multifamily industry who manage housing projects with that particular clientele. And through these referrals, my investors now has a steady lead source, a referral source for getting for selling renters insurance to the tenants in those particular multifamily deals. So it's a win-win for everybody. And the investor has a new stream of clients. My friends in those deals are making additional lead referral income with minimal work. And this is just a money connection where I'm not getting anything directly, but the investor now considers me to be someone who has brought in value and is willing to come into my deals in a much bigger scale. So countless examples of the money connection, how amazingly effective it can be. The key is to get to know your context really well. I think one very important thing to do is don't get so caught up in the money connection that that's all you focus on. As I've said in the past, that at the end of the day, the money connection can be transactional in nature. So a transactional relationship can peter out over time, and it's important to make the effort to dig a little bit deeper and make at least one other kind of connection from the 4 connection types that I've outlined, so that becomes a relationship that stays on for a very long time, right? The third connection we're going to talk about is the passion connection. I referred to this earlier. And we're not obviously talking here about a romantic liaison or any of that kind of a connection here. We're talking about an activity that someone deeply cares about. This could be a nonprofit. It could be a charitable cause. It could be a hobby that is dear to someone. Someone may be really passionate about making model airplanes. Well, if they're passionate about it, they're probably spending a lot of time, effort, money behind it. And if they are, then that is something you need to connect with them about. So this is an equally powerful path to building profitable relationships, which a lot of people ignore. And which is why I think this is something I really want to highlight. Let me give you an interesting story here, which is a few days ago. And you may have heard this, right? This has been going on the airwaves for the last few weeks, in fact. And I heard this story on NPR. It was an inspiring story of this 22-year-old lady by the name of Melanie Perkins from Australia. And she had a startup idea to create an online design tool for publishing school yearbooks. She found the yearbook publishing mechanism in her city in Australia, in her school district, to be really arcane. So she wanted to create an online design tool where the Parent-Teacher Association could get in there, create really nice, interesting designs for the yearbooks, and then get them published quickly. So she started doing that with some bootstrap money and got to a certain level of scale, but really wasn't able to scale beyond that, right? It really, there's a lot of constraints in terms of cash, in terms of the audience, in terms of how she was able to move that business into a bigger play. So what she did was she decided to, she heard that Silicon Valley is a place to go to get funding for these kind of innovative startups. So she just went and parked herself in Silicon Valley and lived there. I think she lived there for like 1.5 years or 2 years. And it was proving to be more difficult than she had imagined. After a lengthy period of being rejected, she met a VC who was intensely passionate about kite surfing. And so it sounds crazy, but Melanie decided that she was going to go learn kite surfing. Excuse me. And then she attended a kite surfing camp in Hawaii that was organized by the VC that she had encountered who was passionate about kite surfing. One thing led to another, and in that conference, she ended up getting funding from that VC, but he then introduced her to several high net worth investors who all were in that kite surfing convention. I don't know what to call it, but she got a significant amount of funding. Her startup eventually took off, and that startup has taken shape today as a very popular site called Canva. Canva.com. I'm sure a lot of us in the real estate industry use this tool. We use it for, our social media presence, for creating ebooks, for creating all kinds of material. It now has a $1 billion valuation. Just goes to show the power of the passion connection, right? A traditional pitch to investors for almost a year and a half, 2 years did nothing for her. Connecting with an investor on the passion of kite surfing, and the next thing you know, her business is in a different place altogether. So it might be an extreme example. I understand that, but let's take something from our own midst, right? In fact, you're right here at MFin, and Danny, feel free to jump in if this is something that you want to put in a word about. But our mutual friend Whitney Sewell, he is extremely passionate about the adoption of children, and he runs a nonprofit that supports families going through the adoption process. Whitney, in fact, is one of the speakers at this MFin Summit, so don't miss his talk as well. And Dan Hanford, along with Danny, who's the organizer of MFin, he has pledged to donate a lot of the proceeds of this summit to Whitney's nonprofit. So, it's just amazing, right? You've got someone here who's in our industry, who's got an amazing passion, and I'm sure many of you have something that you're really passionate about. It's fine. It's good to go talk about it, but it's more important to also learn about what others are passionate about. This passion connection throws up a lot of positive karma, and I'm confident that it comes back manifold. I know it'll come back manifold to Whitney, to Dan, to Danny. I'm personally touched by this gesture, and which is why I'm drawing your attention to it. So, passion connection, very important. And, this actually brings me back to the first story that I started this talk with. You remember the one where I was on the same platform as President Barack Obama? That came about through a passion connection. I volunteer myself with an organization that focuses on capacity building among minority communities. And as part of this, we bring together individuals and groups to trade ideas. And in one of those efforts, we ended up, working with the chairman of our local chamber of commerce, who is also the president of one of the largest health insurance providers in Texas. And while we're sitting together and working and experiencing, sort of exchanging our ideas, he talked about how in the African American community, which he's part of, there's the focus that he's trying to bring on providing positive and constructive role models to the youth, something that I'm passionate about and something we work on. So that passion and the subject we were talking on led to a collaboration on sort of knowledge exchange on how to really work on that and how to build these constructive and positive role models. And sometime later, I hear from him. It turns out that he also was the convener of the National Diversity and Leadership Conference. He invited me and another colleague from my organization to come speak there and share our experience. And it's only then that we actually learned how big the conference was and the fact that these major personalities like Colin Powell and Barack Obama were going to be there as well. So that really would not have come about without this connection over something we were both passionate about. So it can lead to big things. Again, you have to be really, really passionate about it. You have to be genuine about it. I keep talking about genuine. This is one area where it's really easy to try to feign that passion and sort of not honestly care about it. I think that's a problem because people will realize that very quickly. You need to have empathy and the desire to help. And if you don't pretend. Just don't do it. It's okay. If you cannot establish a passion connection, don't try to do it over something that you don't care about, right? And then finally, the last point I'm going to talk about very quickly is the aspiration connection. This is really, we're talking, it's the stuff about dreams, literally, right? Dreams, hopes. We're talking about, the bucket list of things that people care about in their lives. and you want to figure out, is there a way to help people along that journey? You really cannot expect yourself to be able to help them accomplish that dream or that, get that hope realized yourself in any, because it's probably something long-term in nature, right? But you could lead them in the direction and help them along the path that could help them, with that aspiration of theirs. So, simple examples, right? I've got an investor who is interested in, whose daughter is interested in attending Harvard University. Well, is that right for her? That's really up to them. But what you can do is, if you know people who've attended Harvard University, connect them and let them talk, let them learn about what it takes to get in there. You have someone who has the aspiration of maybe doing skydiving. Well, I've done skydiving myself. Happy to talk to you about that and help you understand, what the risks are, as well as what the excitement is and what you can get out of it, and where to go to do it, right? So this really is, this is probably one of those connection points that's probably the hardest one to achieve. And people are shy about sharing their aspirations because they're afraid of being laughed at or being judged. So if you have the empathy and the ability to help someone open up, share with you, that's half the battle. You don't even have to have a solution for them. But when they voice their aspirations, they become more open to receiving suggestions. And once that happens, that connection then allows you to bring together a network that can get them on their journey. So you remember the woman I was talking about who was in the Women in Leadership conference that I met, who wanted to find a job? Well, in one of those conversations, she shared that she dreams about buying a penthouse in a high rise in one of the real chic areas of Dallas, and she wants to retire there eventually. She's not there. She's not there financially to be able to do that. But it just turns out that I have a friend who's an American, but who lives in Dubai, and interestingly has bought a condo in a high rise in Uptown, which is a very chic area of Dallas. So the next step I did was, collecting information from that friend in Dubai on what her process was, what it cost to do that, who was a realtor who specializes in that kind of a high-end living thing, and passing all that information and contacts to my investor so that she can view that aspiration of hers from a real possibility perspective versus just remaining a dream. And that's where, this aspiration connection can form deeper relationships. You're creating value in areas that people don't expect you're going to create value. So there you have it, right? The 4 points, as I said, to establish a connection with people, build highly profitable relationships, is these 4 things, right? The personal connection, the money connection, the passion connection, and the aspiration connections. And I just want to leave you with this, that, as Danny introduced me in the beginning, I've been full-time in multifamily investing for 3 years. We've done over 3,000 multifamily units in that time. We've raised over $10 million across these deals. And we've really invested heavily in Texas and Florida, achieving a lot for ourselves, but even more for our investors and for our deal partners. So along the way, we've made some really amazing relationships, gotten to know Joe Fairless, Veena, Adam Adams, Henry, Annie, a lot of people not here. So if you see this and you think, why would not put you here? It's just, I didn't want to create a really crowded slide, but a lot of people with whom I have a relationship, they may have started one way. It may have been a money relationship, perhaps, where it started off, but has gone on to, incorporate other forms of connections that has made those relationships deeper, where we consult with each other on things just even outside business, right? We talk about things outside of business, and that's what makes these relationships really strong, deep, and long-lasting in nature. And then finally, I've talked about my partner, Dustin Howard, and his wife, Penny, and we decided to partner up and build Zane Holdings. And that partnership has happened because of the fact that we ended up sharing all 4 points of connection, right? Our business partnership has become entwined into our friendship and our shared values and ethics, the vision that we share for our children, for our families. We're aligned on practically everything you can imagine on how we wish to treat our investors, take care of them, how we wish to, the kind of deals we want to do, the aspirations we have for our families, for ourselves. It's something that really has come together, and that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. It takes effort. It's not something you can measure. I always say relationships are not scalable. But when I say that, I don't mean that in terms of you can't grow them. They're not scalable from a metric-driven perspective. They are scalable if you put in the time and effort, and can lead to a lot of value. So, well, I know I've talked a lot, tried to really give a lot of stories here, but thank you if you've stayed on for this session. And I'd really love at this point to be able to take any questions you might have.
Ike, excellent job. Looks like so far, I think all of your questions have been answered. If there are 2 or 3 key takeaways to have people think about building those relationships, let's go with those 2. Give me 2 key takeaways. Successful in building relationships. And then I'm going to come at it from a investor specific conversation. Okay.
So I think the 2 key takeaways, right? The first thing I will say is that you have to be open to listening. If you are getting into a relationship where you are not paying attention to the person that you are building a connection with, and all you're hearing is the dollar aspect of that conversation, you're missing out a lot in that process, which is where the deeper connections and the deeper relationships lie. So I think that's the first one. You have to be willing to listen, be open to listening. And in fact, you have to actively listen. And I think the second thing that I would say is that you have to be willing to put yourself out there to actively look for making those connections happen outside of just yourself. When you're listening, and if you hear someone express a desire for something or need something or are looking to do something, at the back of your mind, you constantly want to have that idea that, do I know someone? Do I know something that's going to fulfill that? And it doesn't matter whether I'm going to benefit or not. If you do those 2 things, I think those are the underpinnings of building relationships.
So what I heard was, number 1, you got to be listening, right? And number 2 is kind of putting yourself out there to make those connections and be open to that. I want to come at it from an investor relationship building perspective, because when folks are out there raising money for apartment syndication deals,
right?
What I've found, and Ike, I know we've talked about it, we've also talked with Holly Williams about it, and it's always kind of interesting. You make a list of people that you think these people are definitely interested and ready to invest, and usually none of those people will invest. And then it's a list of like, well, these people are probably a no or a maybe at best. And usually all of those people end up investing. So let's come at it. What do we need to do from a relationship perspective to build relationships with investors who are going to invest in apartment investment opportunities?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's probably the experience that almost every single one of us has had. First deal you do, you've got a list and you think that, oh my God, I've got this list and I know they're going to invest, and everybody comes up a cropper. I think what I've learned along the way is the missing element is when you're building that list, I hope every one of us is talking to those people well in advance of an actual deal, even if we've known them, right? Even if we're saying the pre-existing relationship exists, or whatever the SEC calls it, the substantive pre-existing relationship, that may exist, great. But I think that by itself is not enough to approach someone and say, look, I've got a deal. We know each other well, come invest. That's just not going to work. And I think a lot of us have made that mistake. We end up assuming that the existing relationship somehow translates into getting that person to invest. The bottom line is start the conversation long before you have a deal. And when you start that conversation, don't start the conversation talking about the fact that you're going to have a deal and that you're going to do this stuff and you're going to do this, all this amazing stuff, and you're going to get this 8% preferred return and, X, Y, and Z. Talk instead about how are you doing? I'm trying to figure out an investment strategy for myself, right? I know I've invested in the past in the stock market. I've invested in X, Y, and Z thing. Just curious, what are you investing in? Learn about what they're investing in. Try to probe into that. And nobody's going to, people will shy away if you ask them actual dollar numbers. How much do you have in something? They might not want to tell you that they have 500,000 in mutual funds. They may not want to say that. But they will not be shy of saying, I have money in mutual funds. And you can ask them, what kind of mutual funds? Ask them, have you invested in REITs, REITs? If they have, what's your experience been, right? Probe on the information that they're sharing with you, not intrusively, but in the style of wanting to learn about it for yourself. Because when you are willing to tell that person, I want to learn from you, it opens up them to learning from you as well, right? So start learning from them. And as you start that process and start doing that, you might say, by the way, John, let's say I'm talking to some generic John, you just told me about the REITs you're investing in and you're getting 4% every year. I have been looking into this multifamily investment opportunity. And you don't have a deal yet, right? You're just looking into opportunities, but I'm looking into it. I parked some money a couple of months ago, and I'm getting this amazing 8% preferred returns check every month. And I was weighing that in my head against REITs, and it doesn't make any sense, right? And then I look at that and I think, oh, wow, not only that, I'm also going to get these tax benefits at the end of the year, which a REIT will not give me. When you approach it from that perspective where you've learned something from your investor, and then you shared back something that compares against what you've learned from them, it piques their curiosity. You need to do that one way or the other. When you mentioned about investors who you said you probably will never invest with you, and they ended up investing, that's probably because they are probably following you silently. You may not realize that they're probably already following you silently, and they're already observing what you're doing, and they're curious about why you've not approached them because you've written them off. But the moment you approach them, they're like, oh, there he calls me. I'm going to invest now. So it's a different dynamic. The people you're pursuing are not following you because you haven't taken the time to establish the connection with them, even though you have the relationship.
Very important. Yeah. And again, I think it comes down to listening. I think it's what you said. It's sitting down and hearing the story of the investor of maybe
Right.
you do have a bunch of money set aside in mutual funds and they just don't know what to do or haven't been or heard about multifamily investment opportunities or real estate or things like that. So it's about listening to what they have to say, what their knowledge base is, and then making sure that you can fill in the gaps and provide that level of detail about different options and different investment opportunities that do exist. So
let me give an interesting example.
Neil had a question in here about what empowering questions do you ask a potential investor to get them to open up. And, one thing that I've always done is kind of asked about the Ford questions, FORD, right? Family, occupation,
recreation and
recreation. Yep.
Dreams.
And then D is what?
Dreams.
Dreams. Yeah. So the Ford questions. Talk to us a little bit about that, Ike, for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very well-known technique, FORD, and there are several people who will say that in every call you make, touch upon all four things, which I think is great if you can. Not every conversation goes in that direction, and I think it's, again, important to listen very carefully. If someone is focusing on one aspect of that FORD, that's okay. Focus on that aspect and drill in as much as you can. But when it comes to empowering questions to open them up, I think the empowering questions are all about you learning from them. Empowering questions are never going to be about trying to get an answer from them that you like, right? So I think it's always going to be about what are you doing? How is it working for you? How can I help in what you're doing? And, let me share what I'm doing and get your feedback on it. That's another way to empower people, right? Rather than saying, I'm doing this thing, come invest with me because it's awesome. Tell them, I'm doing this thing. What do you think about it? In fact, I have a friend who constantly asks me, so Ike, aren't you putting all your eggs in one basket by putting everything in multifamily? I mean, you're so
Yeah.
confident about it. And I'm like, yeah, I am,
Yeah.
which is why I'm doing that.
Excellent.
And,
Ike, I really appreciate it. I'm getting in trouble over here. I've been
okay,
given a piece of paper that I have to go through because I've been screwing things up.
right.
But Ike, what is the best way that folks can get in touch with you and reach out to you if they have any investment questions, syndication questions, or they're interested in opportunities that you have going on?
Sure. So easiest way to get in touch with me, just write to my email address. It's ike@zaneholdings.com, IKE. And I've put up this little slide. I don't know if it's visible. Is it visible? I don't know.
What's that?
I've put up a slide. Is that visible, Danny?
Yes.
It
Yep.
is. Okay. Yeah. So this
So we
slide.
got Zane Holdings, Ike at Zane Holdings. My
Right.
friend Ike, a pleasure, sir, always. We are going to be taking a break. For those of you who have not heard about the iPad drawing yet, we're giving away some iPads. You can register for the next January 2020 summit. You'll get one entry for the iPad. Just go to nextmfin.com, register, and you'll get an entry for an iPad drawing. You can also go to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast, post a review to iTunes, send a screenshot of that review to Stacy at multifamilyinvestornation.com, and she'll add you with an entry for that. And then you also get an entry if you attend 50% of the sessions. You get 3 entries if you do 75%. And if you do 90% participation in the summit going on today, tomorrow, and Saturday, you'll get 10 entries. So make sure you get your entries in. We're doing an iPad drawing from those entries. Again, Ike, my friend, thank you for teaching us about building those relationships and the critical points to success. We are going to take a break for the next, we've got now about 13 minutes. We will begin at 12:30 Eastern, and we've got alternate sources of capital coming up with Peter Fisher. So that will be the alternate sources of capital with Peter Fisher starting in room 3 at 12:30 p.m. And I'm going to sign off for a short little break. Ike, thank you again for being here. Really appreciated the relationship building information.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.